This is not a quick beginner flip. What started as $25 ugly nightstands turned into a full transformation involving power tools, advanced modifications, and plenty of time. I reshaped the tops, rebuilt the base, added fluting, hardware, and custom legs, all to replicate the look of $1,800 West Elm Quinn nightstands. If you're ready to level up your refinishing game, this one's definitely for you. I unboxed my new cordless circular saw, marked the cut line using painter's tape and a pencil, and then with everything lined up, I made the first cut to remove the base. With the back cut, I was able to unscrew the base and lift it off. The drawer slides are held onto the center back piece, and so the first thing I did was remove the L bracket and mark the original spot so that I could ultimately put it back in the right place. My plan was to add a solid wood piece to the bottom in order to attach the new legs. I took everything apart so that I could repurpose as much as possible, especially this back brace. Before I was able to slide it back in, however, I needed to just cut off these end pieces so that it would be flush. So I used my multi-tool for that, and then a quick sand, and it was good to put back in. I lined this up where I had drawn my initial line that marked where the L bracket was securing the drawer slide in place. And then I screwed everything back in using the existing pocket holes. Before screwing that L brace or bracket back in, I did a quick test fit on the drawer. Then I screwed it back in and did one more test just to make sure everything would line up properly. Confident that the drawers would slide smoothly with everything lined up, I now attached the back center brace to the bottom. I countersunk the screw so that when I put the backing back on, it will sit flush. Pulled out my multi-tool again to cut back a couple of little spots on the bottom in order to make sure that when I slide in the new wood base piece, it will sit square. With that done, I was able to head to Home Depot with my measurements, grab myself a laminated birch panel, and take advantage of the fact that they will cut everything to size for you on site at no cost. Grabbed myself some corner brackets so that I could secure the bottom piece back into the sides to make sure that the base was structurally sound. Before securing the new bottom piece, I repurposed the remaining two wood braces and again used the original pocket holes. This makes sure everything stays strong and aligned. And at this point, I was finally able to secure that new bottom piece to the base using the brackets that I had picked up, pre-drilled the holes, and then screwed them in. Now this is strong and sturdy and ready for new legs. To modernize the shapes of the tops, I used my circular saw again and cut the edges off to align with the sides. I'm using a saw jig here to make sure that I cut evenly and straight. It helps line things up a little bit. You can see I made a few wobbles, but that's okay. We'll be able to sand that out. I did the side on each nightstand. Then I modified the distance for the jig to cut off the other side. And then finally modified the distance or spacing for the jig to cut off the front pieces as well. The drawers had this really dated trim, so I pried it off using my hammer and a putty tool. I find this works really well. It's an old one I keep just for this purpose. And then I just pried it off with my hammer. It's plastic, as you can see. After prying off all the molding, I was left just with a couple of nails still in the front, so I pulled them off using a set of pliers. After that, I sanded everything smooth and got ready to add my fluting. For the fluting, I used this roll of bamboo. First, I measured the height of the drawer fronts and then made the cuts with my miter saw. I cut to the right width for the drawers. Sometimes you're able to use a full piece. Sometimes you need to piece a couple things together, but that's fine. I cut around the edges of the fabric on the backs of the fluting, removed it, and then used some wood glue, in this case Gorilla Glue, and a foam brush to cover the entire face of the drawer fronts before putting the fluting back in place. I like to flip the drawers over so that the face is down on a flat surface and then use a weight. Let it sit overnight to make sure that it is nice and dried and secured. Sometimes, like in this case, the edges are a little bit lifted, so I used my pneumatic nail gun to secure them in place. I applied a tiny bit of wood filler to the nail holes, and then once that was dry, I was able to sand it back smooth. You'll also notice along the edge of the fluting, sometimes it's just a little uneven or rough. That's why I like to cut a little bit longer than the actual drawer face, and then I sand it smooth with my orbital sander. Because I was going to go a little bit darker with the fluting on the fronts of these drawers, I sanded the finish back and then made sure I got right down to raw wood. I also sanded the bottom that I put on just to make sure it was completely flush and smooth, and then got going with the leg installation. I put the legs in place and then marked all of the screw holes with my pencil so I'd know where to drill. Pre-drilled the holes. And then screwed all of the legs into place. When I cut the sides down, it exposed the particle board, so I used some Bondo to fill some of that, as well as some of the rough cuts that I had made. There were also some areas of the sides that weren't quite flush, so I actually sanded those right down using my sander. Then after all the Bondo had dried, I used the sander again to go back and sand everything smooth. I've got this quick connect system that I find super handy when I need to switch back and forth between sanders. I'm moving over to my rectangular Festool sander here because it makes it way easier to get into corners and edges like this. In this particular case, I actually grabbed my carbide scraper as well to scrape off some of that Bondo in there. And then everything was pretty smooth, but I could still see some spots in the particle board that weren't quite filled, so I went back in with wood filler and sanded that smooth as well. Everything then got a quick wipe and it was time for primer. I'm using my Zinsser Bin shellac-based primer. This is great for adhesion, also great though when you need to seal particle board like this. I always use a foam brush and a foam roller because this shellac primer is so difficult to clean up, and so I dispose of it after I'm done. I stained the fluting using Fusion Stain and Finishing Oil in Walnut. And then after letting it sit for, I think it was about 5 minutes, I used a blue shop towel and wiped it back. With the primer dry, I gave it one more quick sand, noticed a few more areas that needed filling again. This time used my dupe filler for one final touch up. Once that was dry, I sanded it with 220 grit, and then finally was able to move on to paint. I'm using emerald urethane trim enamel here in a satin finish. The color is snowbound, and now I'm using a brush and a microfiber roller. It took 4 thin coats to give full coverage. Did a tiny bit of sanding between coats as needed using 220 grit sandpaper. I always wax the drawer slides on these wooden pieces because it makes them slide a little bit more smoothly. They can get a bit sticky over time. Now I'm checking to make sure that this edge pull hardware is going to fit and the drawers will close properly before I install it. Sometimes the drawers are really tight together and so it's difficult to put a edge pull in there. And if that's the case, I use a flush pull and just line it up to the top edge of the drawer. To install these black edge pulls, I measured from both sides, marked the holes, checked to ensure the pulls would be spaced evenly on the fluting, and then pre-drilled the holes, and finally screwed everything in place. With the nightstands almost done, the last thing to do was reinstall the backing. I had to remove a couple staples with my pliers, then secured the backing in place with some finishing nails and my hammer. This wasn't just a repaint. I reshaped the tops, I rebuilt the base, I added fluting, added new legs and hardware, all to replicate the look of West Elm nightstands. The retail price for this set at West Elm is nearly $1,800 Canadian plus tax. My version was built from scratch using DIY techniques and a $25 set of nightstands. But that's exactly why pieces like this are perfect for experimenting and learning. If I had messed up the circular saw cuts or couldn't figure out how to secure the new base and complete the structural repairs, I'd only be out the $25 I spent on the nightstands in the first place. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this transformation, be sure to like the video and subscribe for more. You can also follow me on Instagram. And finally, check the description for products and tools used in this video.